Okay, we invite Malika from Brisbane. Malika from Brisbane, please unmute yourself.
Ajahn, my question is, during the robe offering ceremonies, what sort of requisites can be offered monks, apart from the robes and other things?
Yep. Well, if it's Katina ceremony, so traditionally they have a set of requisites that people offer. There's the cloth for making robes. There's an alms bowl, needle and thread, a belt. These are the main things that are offered. They're all things that monks can use every day. But nowadays we have the sort of more broader kind of requisites and supports that monasteries use. So whichever monastery you're attending, probably best to ask the senior monk, is there anything that the monastery needs? So sometimes they need particular items that are useful in the kitchen or the tool room or just generally in the monastery. Some people are very sharp and observant, and they just see what the monastery needs. They don't need to ask anyone. They just observe, oh, this is what they need, and they go away and they find it and bring it to the monastery. Other people want to ask to make sure they're getting something that's really useful. And then some people don't ask, and then they bring something that's not particularly useful. You get that as well, but that's part of life. So it's really up to you. Many monks are quite shy. They don't like to bother anyone. So they don't like to ask for anything. Like that's my character since I've been a monk. I try my best not to ask for things. But monasteries are community places. So often there's things happening that need support. Buildings get built. Things need to be maintained, cleaned. Monks live there. Monks need requisites, they need medicines, they need robes, bowls, food, obviously. So I would talk to the senior monk of whichever monastery you're attending and supporting and see if he has any suggestions. Otherwise, you just have to sit there and observe very carefully.
Then, is there a special time that we can talk to the monk at the monastery, your monastery, to talk to you?
You can always ring up and leave a message, and we try to get back to you. We try to answer messages. So that's one way.
Okay. You'll be coming there soon.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you, Bhante. Thank you, Ajahn. Sadhu.
Sadhu.
Lumpo, we have another question from the chat box from Ling Po Fong. The question goes like this: how do we guide young children 7 to 11 years old about bullying in school?
A good question. Whether it's an adult or a child, there's different aspects to it, aren't there? One is just your own personal Dhamma reflection. So even young children can understand a certain amount of Dhamma. So maybe you see or witness or are involved with somebody who's a bully, or acts or speaks inappropriately, aggressively. When you go away, you may be, upset, disappointed, angry, but you can reflect, do I have that same characteristic? Do I behave in that way? Do I still have anger, or can I still harm other people through what I do? That's one reflection. Certainly for adults, that should be one of the top reflections you have when you are experiencing some kind of workplace bullying or some kind of thing. You reflect, well, do I do that? Because if you're doing it and you're not realizing it, then you could quite often be, making the whole situation worse because you don't even realize what you're doing. So you reflect back, do I do that? And you may find, no, I don't do that. And I may still have some anger in me, but I don't display it in that way, and that's good. But you have to observe yourself first and ask yourself that question. And even children can do that, because you want to help them not to become bullies, because often human beings react not so well, don't they? They're being bullied, and then they get angry, and they look for ways to seek revenge or whatever. So try to get them to develop some inner introspection, to look at their own mind, their own behavior. Obviously bring up some of the qualities that help them deal with a bully if they're being bullied, then to bring up the patience, the strength of mind, the mindfulness, so they can be careful around this person and make some good decisions. So if this is the second part of it, if they're being bullied or affected by another child, what are they going to do about it? They've got to have a strategy, and you can help them work that out. So probably the best one is go to a teacher and seek support from a teacher if they can. If the bullying is not too extreme, maybe they can stand up to the person in a small way, just stand up for themselves. But if that's too risky or too difficult, well, go to seek help from a teacher. Maybe if it continues, or if it's really bad, then mum or dad has to go and speak to the teacher as well and try and get to the bottom of the problem. So there's a number of different levels you work on, isn't it? There's the individual attitude and mental practice, internal practice, how to deal with that, to recognize a kilesa as a kilesa. So if you see a kilesa in another child, to recognize that this is wrong, this is somebody acting out of anger or hurting, harming other people. As I said, also notice whether you have that same tendency. And if you notice working on yourself, well, you might develop, say, the practice of metta bhavana. Obviously, increase your mindfulness and try to keep precepts. One of the things that will help with bullies is that if you keep your precepts, you don't respond with anger or seek revenge against that person. That tends to be a protection. That can protect you. But then there's the strategies on the outside, seeking help from the teacher, making the teacher aware if somebody is harming you, you need to get help, because if that person, or it's a group of people and there's more of them than you, or they're bigger than you, you're going to need some help. And so the parent's job is to reassure your kid, make sure they know they are going to get help. So there's a number of different aspects to it. But the same for adults, you may still need to get help as an adult sometimes, but you also have to look internally at how you're mentally coping with this bullying and with what it's bringing up in your mind, and how to deal with your own mental kilesas in that situation. That's part of the practice as well.
Sadhu Lumpur, there are a couple more questions in the chat box. Question from Nadi Karuna Ratna. The question goes like this. Ajahn, my friend who has breast cancer is going in for her surgery on Tuesday. How can I be of help without being intrusive?
Oh, well, if you have friends doing any kind of surgery or having extreme illness, you can meditate for them. Loving kindness meditation, metta, Maitri meditation. When you got some free time, sit down quietly, maybe follow the breathing for a while to calm your mind, and then bring up the thought of loving kindness for yourself, and then the people around you, and then send it out to your friend. If you do this all the time, you can go straight to your loving kindness for that friend, because if you're familiar with that object of mind, that meditation, you can just do it at any time. You can think of them and send your thoughts to them. If you go and visit them and they're in surgery, you can sit outside and send thoughts to them in the operating theatre. Or if you're actually with them in a room, you can talk and express your loving kindness through words and actions as well as thoughts. So loving kindness is a very powerful, positive thing you can do. Even when somebody is unable to speak or communicate with you, you can do it. So it's good for you because you're practicing mindfulness and bringing out very wholesome states of mind. It's good for your friend, and if the connection is strong, well, maybe it can have some subtle influence. Certainly nothing is lost by doing this.
Sadhu Lumpo, there are the next question in the chat box is from Karma. It goes like this: Ajahn, is it a satya when I feel I am just doing my obligations, working and living here for my parents' expectation, not able to fulfill and pursue my path?
Well, I don't know all the details of your situation, but you can work, you can help parents as a wholesome action, a skillful action, without creating suffering for yourself. Maybe that could be a goal you could aim for. Work will tend to tire you out, and it brings all kinds of suffering, I know, but work is just work. Our aim is to bring up wholesome states of mind as we do it. Reflect, bring up the mindfulness and reflect. You're doing a job, maybe in the course of that job you can help people do some good, but in the end it's just a means to earn a living, and you try to do that job without breaking precepts, harming others, and it provides you with yourself with income, and maybe it's income that supports your family as well. Try and see the good in it, but also see the impermanence in it. You won't do that job forever. Whatever income you get, whatever wealth you generate, doesn't last forever. So it's obviously not the most important thing in life. More important is your mind, bringing your mind to the Dhamma. So maintaining precepts, maintaining mindfulness, cultivating mindfulness, and reflecting on the impermanence and non-self in your experience. So you can help parents with seeing the impermanence of that relationship. One day your parents will die, probably die before you, although not always the case. Perhaps it's a good chance to help them while they're alive, because one day they won't be there. You try to bring up wholesome reflections as you do these things. But the highest Dhamma is the insight into impermanence, suffering, and non-self. And keep that in the back of your mind as you go about your business. If you really see these three characteristics, you won't be suffering as you work or as you help your parents. You're just doing it maybe because it's something you can do. You're in a position to help your parents. You're in a position to go out and work. Well, do it. If you're really ready to give up the world and go and become a monk or a nun, well, fine, you can do that as well. But if for whatever reasons you're not ready to do that, we'll try to cultivate the Dhamma within your situation. And one day we won't be here, so everything is impermanent. Don't give in to your negative mental states, greed, anger, delusion, for whatever reason. The Buddha's teaching, he said, there's no excuse to give in to anger. He set the bar very high. He said, even if a baddie grabs you and starts sawing your arm off, if you get angry with the baddie, you're not following what the Buddha taught. That's just, as high as you can get, because basically the Buddha is saying, if you give in to a mental state of anguish, negativity, greed, fear. These are mental kilesas which will always bring suffering. So you always have to be focused on abandoning them, whatever your situation. Whether you've been grabbed by baddies and have been having your limbs sawn off, or you're just going to work, or you're helping your family, whenever anger arises, it's a kilesa to be abandoned. Try and get that understanding clear in your mind. Of course, sometimes if you're ready, you can go off on retreat or stay in temples and monasteries, or even become ordained if you're ready. But, you could become ordained and still have a mind full of anger if you don't understand the Four Noble Truths and the way of practice. The important thing is establish your mind in right view, whatever your life situation, and then work out from there. And that will probably lead you to make wise decisions and good decisions that support your practice as you go through your life, whether it's helping family, going to work, or whatever. We can, of course, help our families in many different ways. Just becoming a monk or a nun doesn't mean to say you can't help your family. Maybe materially you have less to give them, but mentally, psychologically, maybe you've got much more you can give them if you take ordination. So that's one pathway you could consider.
There's a second question from the same person, and it goes like this. I heard from one talk that Mara's third daughter is responsibility when the other two are desire or attachment and aversion. I think it is an interesting point of view. Can Ajahn please elaborate on this one?
Sense of responsibility, was it?
The third daughter is said to be responsibility by this question.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's an exact interpretation of what the Buddha said, but responsibilities can, of course, like anything, become an attachment and a form of delusion. You're in a position of responsibility. So in your work or in your family, or you could be a teacher, and it can delude you, can't it? You say, oh, I have this role, this duty to perform, this responsibility, this obligation. And then if you're not doing it as well as your mind thinks it should be you should be doing it, then you might start to feel self-critical or have self-doubt. Or if somebody else seems to be interfering with your responsibility, you might blame them and say, oh, they're causing me trouble, and so on. So, like anything else in life, we need to establish mindfulness and reflect on what's going on, and particularly root out greed, anger, and delusion in our situation. I mean, responsibility in itself can be a very good thing. So, I wouldn't say it's Mara necessarily. Being a parent, say, is a position of responsibility. You've got one or more kids to look after. That's a huge responsibility. You brought them into the world. But as we know, parents can get angry with their kids because you want certain things for them. You want them to behave in a certain way, do certain things. You want them to be successful, safe, happy. And then sometimes through their own karma, they don't do that. They don't listen to you, they make mistakes, or things go wrong, and it can make you angry. And you could say, well, I'm angry because I have this sense of responsibility for my kids. But you can actually separate these things out. You say, yes, I'm responsible for these kids. The anger is caused by moments of lapses of mindfulness and identifying with the idea of being mom, being dad, I am the parent. And so you automatically or spontaneously react with anger when they don't act in the way you want, because you have some preconditioning saying, oh, they're my kid, they should follow what I say because they're my kid, they're young, I'm the boss, I'm the parent, they should do what I say. All the causes and conditions are set up for you to get angry. But you can't really pin that on being as a responsible parent. It's more your attachment or your delusion in that role. if you're a parent, you have no choice you have to be responsible, don't you? You have to look after those kids, but be wary of over-attaching to being a parent or your views on the role of being a parent towards your kids, because that's where the suffering will come from. So these are subtle things, and the best way to unpackage this and understand better, I say, is meditate every day. Practice meditation, you'll start to see some of these emotions, what triggers them, and you'll sort of recognize where your ideas, your ideals, your views can be triggered, your attachment to those views, those ideals is triggering suffering. So it's not necessarily being a parent or being a supervisor or a manager or being a teacher or being this, being that is necessarily the problem. It's more our delusion that slips into that role and takes over. That's the real Mara behind it.
Sadhu Lumpur, there are another about 7 more questions. The next question is, I have been sitting regularly and comfortably daily for 45 minutes. Would you recommend that I extend the 45 minutes session or to add another session to the day?
Well, as a general answer, yes, extend the time you meditate, do it more. You'll probably get more out of it. The more effort you put into it, the more you get out of it. But whether that means sitting more than 45 minutes, sitting for an hour or even longer, or taking up a second meditation period during your day, well, you might have to work that out from your own lifestyle and what you get up to every day. But generally speaking, the longer you sit, if you're regularly meditating, you've done it for a while, you have a foundation, generally the longer you sit, the better, because it will make you put more effort in and you may get more out. So I found very difficult when I first began meditating regularly to sit longer than, first of all, longer than 5 minutes, later longer than 20 minutes, later longer than 45 minutes. I got up to 45 minutes and then I found so much pain I had to stop. But what I started to notice was if I could sit for a bit longer than 45 minutes, my mind became very peaceful, concentrated, my mindfulness was stronger, and my mind gathered together in samadhi. So at first I was noticing I'd reach 45 minutes and out of habit I say, oh, time to stop. But then I noticed I was actually becoming more concentrated, my mindfulness was improving. So then I had to tell myself at 45 minutes, don't believe that voice that says stop, ignore that and carry on sitting, which is quite hard because often there was a lot of pain. And one voice is saying, stop, it's painful. And the other is saying, no, sit on a bit longer, it might be good. But I had to start believing that voice, and so I did. I started sitting up to an hour, and I found the last 15 minutes of that hour, I got very peaceful and got a lot of insight into letting go of painful feelings, attachment to the body, various mental hindrances that came up. I found those last 15 minutes very fruitful in my practice in the early years. So if you've reached 45 minutes sitting and you're asking, should I carry on till an hour? I would say yes, carry on to an hour. And generally speaking, the more effort we put into our practice, the more we'll get out of it.
Sadhu Lumpur, the next question is from Veena. It goes like this. My husband has been ill and he is suffering. Although he meditates and chants daily, his faith is weakening and he is questioning his practice. How should one strengthen our faith in such situation where bodily suffering is so overwhelming?
Yeah, I think that's a good question and a very common experience for people as they get older. My experience is, well, listening to the Dhamma can help. So getting the man who's becoming weaker or more ill and older, getting to him to hear Dhamma might help if his faith is wavering at this stage in life. So listening to Dhamma, finding ways to get the good Dhamma to the person we're talking about through mobile phones, computers, reading books, Dhamma books to the person can help as well. So good Dhamma inputs at least once a day, listening to Dhamma or reading Dhamma or having the Dhamma read to them at least once a day can be a real benefit, boosting faith, getting them to reflect on the Dhamma, appreciate the Dhamma more. So anything you can do in that respect can help. Of course, doing your own meditation can help, sending your thoughts to the person and materially, of course, caring for them, looking after them. And if you can, get them to practice a little bit of meditation or chanting, or just encourage them to do it, maybe by doing it with them. That can help. So we sit as a Dhamma friend, we sit with them as they chant or as they meditate, even if it's only for a few minutes, even if they're falling asleep. Whatever effort we make, any small efforts are still worth it, I'd say. You have to remember, one moment of mindfulness can change somebody's state of mind quite quickly. So even though that person may be wavering in their faith, they're weak, they're tired, if they have a few moments of mindfulness, things can improve quite quickly.
Sadhu Lumpo. The next question from Pamuja. It goes like this. Please advise, how do we greet passing Sangha when we are sitting down eating or when they are passing by? Do we get up and greet them with palms together?
Well, I'm not sure what the situation is, but generally we respect the robes. Even if the individual wearing the robes you don't particularly get on well with, can happen. It's the robes, the shaven head, the robes, and the precepts they're keeping are what you are respecting. So when you're meeting Sangha, you just show respect in the way that you are comfortable with. Over the decades and centuries and in different countries, people show their respect in different ways. So some people, monk walks into the room, everyone stands up. In some countries, and then you go to another country, a monk walks into the room, everyone sits down. It varies. So my training, in Ajahn Chah's monastery is when the monk walks into the room, you sit down, you put your hands in Anjali, and if they actually sit down, say on a seat like this, say before a talk, well, you might bow 3 times. But sometimes it's not convenient, or depends on the situation, you can't bow, so you just put your hands together. That shows respect, whatever's happening. Sometimes you can't even sit down. Maybe you're in a situation, say you meet a monk on a bus, you may have to just stand there, but you can still put your hands in Anjali. Like, the shops in Australia, there's one shop called Bunnings, so occasionally the monks have to go and get something for the monastery from Bunnings. Now they know the monks, and so you go into Bunnings and they're not Buddhist, but they'll put their hands up to show respect to the monks. So you might say that's a development since we've been living in Australia. So, number one is mentally have respect for the robes, for the renunciation of the monastic, monks or nuns, and you just see what's appropriate. It's not always what we think. Like if somebody's eating food and a monk walks past, well, if you're eating food, maybe you just have to carry on eating food, and it's not through disrespect, or you're in the middle of a meal. There's situations where it's just not, it's not possible to physically show much respect to a monk. But then there's other situations where you can very easily show respect. So it depends on this time, the place, where you are, what's happening.
Sadhu Lumpo. The next question from ST Lee. Bhante, can you explain what is the origin of thoughts when one is cut off from normal senses when we are asleep?
When we are asleep?
What's the origin of thoughts?
Well, when you're in deep sleep, you don't really have any thought. Your mind goes into hibernation, bhavanga, so it's not knowing anything. But doesn't mean to say you're enlightened or it's not like nothing's left. It's these anusaya, these underlying tendencies are still there. It's just you've gone into deep sleep, so they're literally not being stirred by anything. But as you come out of deep sleep, or just before you go into deep sleep, or as you come out, your mind is, we say, half awake, half asleep, the dream state. So then things start to surface, but your mindfulness and your awareness is not full yet. You're not fully aware. So that's why we sometimes have dreams, and some of those dreams seem very kind of weird or difficult to work out what's going on. Some we remember, some we don't. Some are clear, some are not. Generally, people who meditate have a little bit more awareness of the dream state because they've practiced mindfulness regularly. So then, as they're waking up from deep sleep, they become aware of the visual images, the thoughts, things going on. So sometimes they can even, we say wake up in the dream. They're dreaming, but they start to become fully aware during the dream. So then you can have an awareness of what's right or wrong as you're dreaming, and you can make decisions. And sometimes we keep the precepts in a dream, sometimes we don't. But you become more aware of that the more you meditate. Those dreams are being stimulated by a number of things, aren't they? Those thoughts as you're coming out of sleep may be stimulated by your own mind. Certain issues are bothering your mind, so they start to manifest before you're fully aware, but they're already coming up in forms of images or dreams. Sometimes it's just random, because our mind, as soon as we come out of bhavanga, things start to happen. We have sensory experience happening, so we get random thoughts coming up. Some of it's memories, some of it's responding to stimulus, or maybe even you hear a noise, so you start coming out of sleep responding to that noise. Sometimes the Buddha even said, as we are asleep, coming out of sleep or going into sleep, we're affected by the food we've eaten. Too much rich food, they say, can stimulate all kinds of thoughts and dreams and just make your mind proliferate more than usual. Probably the most normal thing is stress, isn't it? When you're stressed, maybe you can't even sleep very well. You can't fall asleep easily. So you're sort of drifting off, but your stress is continuing in your thinking. Or because you're stressed, you fall asleep, but you don't sleep for very long. So then you come out of your sleep, you start to awake, and you pick up that stressful thinking again. When it's real stress, really strong stress, states of stress, even though you might go into bhavanga because your body really needs the rest, as soon as you come out, the first thing you pick up is that problem that you've been stressing over. And it can seem so intense, right up to the moment you fell asleep, it was there. As you wake up, it's there. That's the most intense kind of stress, like fear, trauma, strong anger, strong anxiety. It can be so overwhelming. It's just like you're falling into bhavanga, you get a little bit of relief in that deep sleep because you're not thinking of anything. But as soon as you start to think again, you pick up the stress, the problem. So it feels like you're enslaved to it. So practice mindfulness and you'll become more aware of the thoughts you're having as you're coming out of sleep or as you're falling asleep, and you'll start to be more aware of what is wholesome and unwholesome, what is coming from kilesa, or maybe you can your mindfulness and wisdom and good qualities will start to infiltrate your thinking even as you're dreaming or falling asleep.
Sadhu Lumpo. Next question is from Sari. Is there a way to recognize anger and other kilesas before they become pariutthana?
Well, basically, it's the sharpness and continuity of mindfulness. As mindfulness becomes purer, more continuous, and particularly if you experience states of samadhi, states of stillness, and as you come out of those states of stillness, the slightest movement of the mind and the slightest reaction to sense stimuli becomes exposed. So, from previously you may have got angry and it comes up very strongly and hangs around in your mind, in your experience for long periods of time and keeps returning. If mindfulness improves, it may get to the point where there's just the tiniest movement of mind and then your mind drops it because straight away it's seen as a kilesa, as a source of suffering. So it's about the practice of mindfulness, continuity of mindfulness. Mindfulness has one quality, is guarding over the mind. So if you're guarding over something, as soon as something that's not right or is a cause of suffering comes near it, you want to drop it. If there's a little fire starts, you want to put it out. And that comes through the experience of practice, the strength of mindfulness, the continuity of mindfulness, and then wisdom can function at its best. The reason we practice mindfulness is so we can be wise to kilesa and let it go quickly and efficiently.
Sadhu Lumpo, the next question is from Nadi. Ajahn, do you have any plans to organize meditation discussion groups for teenagers or early teens? My daughter grew up knowing you as our Ajahn and just turned 13. It would be great if Ajahn could consider organizing workshops or discussion groups for teens. This way, they can meet like-minded friends in a positive space.
Well, I'm certainly open to the idea. We'll think about it if we can do a special session for young people, maybe something like this, but particularly directed to the young. So if we do, we'll let you know, we'll advertise it. Whether they'll really be interested to hear an old monk like me, I just celebrated my 60th birthday, maybe they find me too boring, too many white hairs, a bit out of touch now. So whether they'll be interested, I don't know, but we can certainly consider the idea. But you just said a forum for meeting like-minded friends, so it's not something that we would do as a kind of dating app for youngsters to meet each other. It would be for those interested in practicing Dhamma.
Sadhu Lumpo. Next question is from Chan. Dear Ajahn, how could I improve my self-discipline on the path of practice? It is very easy to get lazy after a retreat. Formal practice is always not consistent, even though I know the goodness of the practice.
That's a good question, and I think everybody has to consider that one. How to continue your practice, keep going. So you have to maybe sometimes sit down with yourself and ask yourself what inspires you, what brought you to the Dhamma practice, what made you start meditating if you meditate, what are the inspirations, and that could be the Buddha himself and the words of the Buddha from the Tipitaka. It could be a particular teacher who you found inspiring, helped you understand better, encouraged you to practice. And then your own reflections, your own insights that you've had so far in your practice. Why do you practice? Ask yourself that question. What is the purpose of it? Why are we here? What's the purpose of life? Whatever questioning and whatever motivation that's worked for you before, well, sometimes you have to return to that from time to time to re-establish your intention to practice. Practice comes from an intention. It's another form of karma. And that intention you have to reinforce, make strong, bring up continuously so that it keeps bringing you to the practice. And one thing that will help will associate with practitioners. So whether it's Sangha, it's probably best of all is Sangha. Spend time, listening to the Dhamma, meeting Sangha, supporting Sangha, but also fellow lay practitioners as well. So the Buddha said, Kalyana Mitta is the whole of the path. Just going alone, doing it totally alone is very difficult to sustain yourself in the practice. So meeting with Sangha is a huge boost and support to our practice.